The KwaZulu-Natal Regional Championship is unique in South African off-road racing in that it caters for an entry-level category known as the cricket class. The category is a budget class with race frames imported from China. The frames are modified for South African use, with the cars powered by motorcycle engines up to 400 cc's, and former South African off-road champion Neil Woolridge is a staunch supporter.
Yeah, this is where it all starts, at the regional grassroots, The cricket class is the smallest and the real entry level of off-road racing. I'd say almost equivalent to a similar price to a motorcycle, and that's where the guys have got to start, So at national level it's very difficult to get in, but in regional level this is where it all starts. The guys get into cricket, maybe go up a step into maybe a class E or something like that, and then progress to the nationals. So both my sons are coming through the cricket class. Lance has already progressed into the nationals in the SP class, but this is Gareth's second year in the crickets. Last year he won the Natal Championship, and this year he's doing quite well again, so looking forward to it.
The cricket class competitors also compete for grid positions on the prologue, with George De Jager setting the pace. De Jager was just 13 seconds ahead of Pietermaritzburg teenager Gareth Woolridge, who was looking for his second victory in a row after a convincing win at the Atlas Copco 400. There was a gap of 45 seconds between Gareth Woolridge and third-placed Warren Confey, who went into the event lying 7th in the championship. Confey was only 4 seconds ahead of Andrew Scott, with the pair around a minute ahead of Dave Confey, who was lying 3rd in the championship behind Roger Curran and young Woolridge. Curran had to be content with 6ths on the prologue. Cricket class drivers also had problems here and there, with Dave Confey delayed by a misfire and a puncture that cost him a place.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. Had a bit of problems when I picked a puncture just the other side of the river crossing. But other than that, a bit of marker problems where there was no clear marker. Then I got overtaken by Gareth. Okay. But up until then, going beautiful.
It's never too young to start, and this youngster could soon be emulating teenager Gareth Woolridge, who completely dominated the cricket class race. The crickets completed 2 laps of the course, with Woolridge soon out front and gradually pulling away from Warren Confey in second place. Confey was thoroughly enjoying himself, but could not match Woolridge for pace. After a disappointing prologue, Mark Smith recovered well to finish a solid 3rd. Smith was running ahead of prologue winner George De Jager, who was a late casualty, with a tough route taking its toll on the crickets. With elder brother Lance, who now competes at national level, there to congratulate him, Gareth Woolridge crossed the finish line with a whopping 21 minutes in hand over Warren Confey. By any standards, it was a comprehensive victory.
He started 13 seconds behind the next car, and I followed in his dust for about 10 k's, screaming him and staying behind him as close as I could. I battled a bit with the dust. Then he moved over on the one corner, and from there I stayed in the front. No problems and clean run.
There was a long wait for Warren Confey to cross the finish line, with another big gap to Mark Smith, who was another 18 minutes in arrears. A second win in a row took Gareth Woolridge to the top of the championship. After a short break following the morning prologue, the race proper got underway, with Arthur Barnes and Anthony Usher first away, with a 3-second gap to Clint Gibson and Gary Campbell. As with the ABSA National Series, regional championship events are run to real time. This means cars set off as per their prologue times, with the old system of 2 or 3 minute dust gaps a thing of the past. Real-time racing means there's some close racing from the word go, and with 3 seconds between the first 2 cars, spectators were provided with early action. The Zarko of Reg Sutton and Warren Benneker started a half a minute behind Clint Gibson and Gary Campbell, and the pair were given an early wake-up call. A little overshoot almost led to a confrontation with a wooden fence, and cost Sutton and Benneker a couple of seconds almost before they'd started. At the front of the field, Arthur Barnes and Anthony Usher were quickly into their stride in the bat. The pair looked in no mood to take prisoners, and an early hold on the race was consolidated when Glenn Gibson and Gary Campbell ran into early problems. That gave Barnes and Usher a comfortable early lead of 1 minute and 43 seconds over Reg Sutton and Warren Benneker. After their early laps, the Zarko crew had started to settle into a rhythm, but would have to up their pace if they were to whittle away at the deficit between themselves and the race leaders. The early woes for Clint Gibson and Gary Campbell lifted the Vehicle Protection Services bat of Gavin and Darren Gray into third in Class A, where they trailed Anthony Barnes and Anthony Usher by a sizable 11 minutes and 35 seconds. There were also early problems for Class B prologue winners John Thompson and Ian Crouch, and James Watson now headed the class in the Mighty Mag. Early movers in Class B were Marcus Taylor and Derek Keith in the JRE. They had made up places and were now chasing Graham Peterson in the Dragonfly. The danger of having to both drive and navigate in a single-seater was amply illustrated when Peterson zipped off to the left on the wrong route. Peterson zigged when he should have zagged, and that lifted Taylor and Keith into second in Class B, and 16 seconds behind James Watson. His little wrong slot, as it's known in the trade, dropped Peterson to over 2 minutes behind Watson. Also on the move were Lance Trethewey and Carl Wichmann in the LT Earth Movers bat. After their prologue woes, Trethewey, who comes from an off-road background, and Wichmann started from the back of the grid, and they were scything their way through the field in impressive fashion. Behind the Class A pair, Class B crew Rob Spencer and Ralph Francis were going along steadily in the Zarko, but were over 7 minutes behind leader James Watson. Behind the Zarko, the unfortunate John Thompson and Ian Crouch were trying to make up lost ground after their early woes, but lost another place on the road when they were passed by Class P leaders Mark Serrao and Kevin Turon. The logo Wild Thing is emblazoned across the BP Drak of Mark Serrao and Kevin Turon, but there was nothing wild about the approach they were taking to the race. There were no heroics from the pair, with John Thompson and Ian Crouch the buffer between Serrao and Turon, and the Gibson racing bat of Glenn Gibson and Andrew Hall, which was running in a strong second place in Class P. It was tough going towards the back of the field. The pretty little Mighty Mag driven by Rob Hanbury was still sounding sweet and full of running, but it slipped to over 9.5 minutes behind Class B leader James Watson. Hanbury was being chased down by the bat of Leon Bortmer and Quinton Brand, who'd also started from the back of the field after trouble on the prologue. Hot on the heels were Class A pair Dave and Jane Gurney in another bat, and they'd also picked up a place or two during the course of the morning. A gear selection problem meant a slight delay in progress for Stephen Murrow and Dylan Hopewell, but they were soon in trouble again in the aging raceco. A brave attempt at a Mexican wave by some local kids greeted Amanda Bortmer, who was going well in the strange-looking missile. The car may look a little out of the ordinary, but it's effective, and Amanda has so far had a clear run. Behind the missile, veteran driver Tony Ball, another back-of-the-grid starter, showed he'd lost none of his rally driving skills. Ball was later to retire, but had moved ahead of Brian Carlitz and Norman Stain. Carlitz and Stain were now nearly an hour behind Class B frontrunner James Watson, with the outdated suspension on the Tiger Wheel car working overtime. There were wheel problems for Daniel Brooks and Thomas Lawson on the prologue, and more of the same during the race. It was a completely different story at the front of the field, and early into the second loop of the race, it was still all systems go for race leaders Arthur Barnes and Andrew Usher. The bat had not missed a beat, and Barnes and Usher were steadily putting time and distance between themselves and those doing the chasing. At the front of those doing the chasing were Reg Sutton and Warren Benneker in the Zarko. While they were also going well, there were alarm bells for Marcus Taylor and Derek Keith, who'd moved into the Class B lead.
It's fine.
Oh, we've got a breakage here.
Taylor suspected something had broken at the rear of the JRE, and while he made a quick inspection, Lance Trethewey and Carl Wichmann went past. So too did James Watson to regain the Class B lead, with Taylor deciding to press on regardless. The steady Graham Peterson was making good progress in the Dragonfly, and the delay saw him closing the gap on Marcus Taylor and Derek Keith. Peterson was still running ahead of Class B Prologue winners John Thompson and Ian Crouch, who'd picked up a spot. They went past the Zarko of Rob Spencer and Ralph Francis on the run in the compulsory stop at the end of Loop 2, where the bat of race leaders Arthur Barnes and Anthony Usher had lost a little time.
We were on started now in the second loop, so we had a nice lead on Reg, but he's obviously closed the gap now. So yeah, we just got to keep it tidy now on the third loop and try and stay in front of him, and hopefully everything runs smoothly.
Yeah, so far so good. We can't catch Arthur. He's a bit quicker than us. So I think we do, and it's so dusty, so we would never get past it. We're going to just try and keep it where we are and get it to the end.
We've got a fuel pressure problem, so the car keeps cutting out, so it's no use carrying on.
We're going all right, eh? I think we're leading B at the moment. There's a second one coming in now.
Yeah, we were leading until about 2 Ks back. There's some funny noise going on there, so we got out to have a little bit of a look, but I can't see it. So problem is the dust hectic to try and pass him again now. It's going to be a bit tricky. He let us through last lap, but I don't think he's going to let us through easy now. We'll go and we'll see.
We did some work on the front end, and it's a little bit hard over the choppy stuff, but otherwise it's going nicely. We've got 8 minutes to Reg Sutton, I think, so it's going to be a little bit of a tall task to do in 70 Ks, but we're going to try, and they could have a puncture, anything can happen, so it's not over until the fat lady sings.
And the fat lady was warming up her tonsils backstage as Arthur Barnes and Anthony Usher picked up on the final loop, where they'd left off after the first 2 laps. With a comfortable lead over Reg Sutton and Warren Benniker, all they had to do was avoid silly mistakes. For their part, Sutton and Benniker looked to have settled for a safe second place, but they also had to avoid silly mistakes to make sure they did not gift second place to Lance Trethewey and Carl Wichmann, who was still on a charge in the LT Earthworks bat. Whatever it was that set alarm bells ringing for Marcus Taylor and Derek Keith was a false alarm. The pair quickly took the JRE back into the Class B lead, and they were to eventually finish around 4 minutes ahead of James Watson, who put up a brave fight in the impressive Mighty Mag. For his part, Watson was 10 minutes clear of the Zarko of Rob Spencer and Ralph Francis, who reaped the rewards of a steady pace throughout the race. Spectators along the route had been well entertained with another gritty effort coming from Graham Peterson, who took 4th overall in the Dragonfly single-seater. That made it 2 single-seaters in the top 5, with John Thompson and Ian Crouch coming in behind Peterson after a good prologue turned into a troubled race. Perseverance also paid off for Dave and Jane Gurney and Daniel Brooks and Thomas Lawson, with the 2 crews finishing 4th and 5th respectively in Class A. The Gurneys were also steadiness personified, and while at one stage it looked as though Brooks and Lawson would run out of wheels, theirs was another brave effort. Back at race headquarters, Arthur Barnes and Warren Benniker put the finishing touches to an impressive performance.
Mistakes, and just kept it tidy. We were rating. Our pit crew was advising us what the gap was, and we backed off the pace and looked after the car and just made sure it came to the end.
Second place.
The margin of victory was a clear-cut 5 minutes, with Lance Trethewey and Carl Wichmann a fighting third. Another impressive performance saw Marcus Taylor and Derek Keith win Class B ahead of James Watson. The next event in the ABSA Off-Road Championship is the Sun City 400 at Sun City on July 29 and 30. Tight championship positions set the scene for plenty of drama from one of the toughest races of the season. The Sun City 400 on July 29 and 30. See you there. The Drak 250 off-road race in KwaZulu-Natal was proudly brought to you by Motique Toyota Kokstad.